mean, it's very interesting because, there's so much crossover in presentation of behavior between narcissism and Asperger's in particular.
Yes.
And the main difference for anybody watching this is in some ways, the way the victim or partner is made to feel or treated is very much the same. But the difference is the person who is doing the abuse, their intention. Feels like it's more. Good morning. Welcome to Metamorphosis Moments, the interview series. I'm your host, Tricia Chandler, RTT therapist and trauma recovery coach. This morning, I am talking with Michelle Carbone, who is an RTT therapist and RTC coach, and RTT is Rapid Transformational Therapy, and RTC is Rapid Transformational Coaching. So Michelle is here with us today. She works a lot with women who are married or have been in relationships with partners on the spectrum. And she has a lot of experience in that area. I find it really compelling because there's a lot of overlap between how Asperger's in particular manifests, as well as that crossover into narcissism, which is really my area of expertise. And a lot of the presentation is very similar. So we're here talking about all of our work together and how we each treat and serve our clients. So welcome, Michelle, to my series.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. So tell me, where in the world do you live?
I'm in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
Norman, Oklahoma. So home of the Sooners.
So you're right outside of Oklahoma City.
Yep.
Norman is where the university is, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So here.
Yeah, I'm an old Ozark hillbilly myself, although I live in Detroit now. So.
Oh, that's funny. My ex is from there.
From Detroit or
from Detroit? Yeah. Well, he lives in Flint now. He moved there after we got divorced.
Oh, okay. Well, hope he's got a lot of bottled water.
Right. I was like, oh, okay, Flint. He was like, well, I'm on a well, and I was like, okay, well, at least there's that.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Right.
Wow.
Don't have to worry about him anymore, right?
Do you have local clients in Oklahoma? How receptive are the people in Oklahoma to RTT?
Yeah, I do. I actually, funny, I worked with a cheerleader not too long ago, and she did a TikTok about it. And so I got like 4 other cheerleaders who had lost their tumbling. And and so it's like this is tumbling block basically, and it was really interesting because they were all really young, and I haven't worked with a lot of like teenagers yet.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So was it like they were is it fear-based? What was that about?
Yeah, it was a lot of fear, or parts that were telling them they couldn't do it, or they're not good enough, the
Self-doubt
stuff that we see. One of them was a coach, had just berated her in front of everyone, and I just wanted to like so I had her yell at him really well because I'm like, how dare you talk to a child this way? She's only 10.
Doubt.
Oh,
they're little kids. They're not even, I was imagining they were like university.
Yeah, well, so a couple were like 16, one was 14, the youngest one was 14, but when she was 10 is when she'd gotten yelled at, and it was just like, oh, why would you do that?
Right. I mean, that kind of stuff is so scarring to a young girl. I mean, I myself have carried an awful lot of weight issues throughout my adult life, and I realized that I can tie every single bit of that, with exception of very little of it, all the way back to the messaging I got from my mom. And
me too.
I was involved in ballet, and it was always so critical that you remain tiny.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my mom actually told me that you'll never find a husband or a man to love you if you get fat.
Wow. Mine would just she was more like an Asian mom where, it's out of concern. Oh, it looks like you've gained weight, and I started hiding food and
Yeah.
yeah, it was and then she's like, "Well, how much do you weigh now?" And I would lie about
Mhm.
how much I weighed, and I was thin then. I'm like,
Yeah.
little
I
did I
never
know I
had,
would be 100 pounds heavier than what I was at that point. But it was like, but she struggled with her weight and when she was growing up, and her mom put her on speed unknowingly, just the
of
doctor,
course,
because that's
of
what the doctors
course.
did in the 50s. They're like, here's some speed. And yeah,
A
so
bunch of housewives at home, stoned on amphetamines, doing their ironing and their cleaning so they could be perfect little Stepford wives, right?
exactly, exactly. So I'm like, I see where the programming all came from, and
Right. Yeah.
but then it's like, okay, well now it's my responsibility to fix that.
Yeah.
So
I never had those weight issues until um the abuse and all of the stuff was going on under the radar, as it were, in my marriage. And I was having trouble being pregnant with my first child because I was scared to death I would get fat and then my husband would leave me. Um,
right.
and then there was this fear that kicked in because I kept losing weight. 6 months into pregnancy, I had lost weight. And
Mm.
the doctor said, you're endangering your child. You've got to start putting on some weight. This is getting serious. And then something clicked, like, oh my God, I'm so afraid that I'm harming my child. Suddenly I was able to keep food down. I started eating and I gained 70 or 80 pounds in the last 3 months of my pregnancy.
Oh wow.
So I guess, that subconscious part of my mind was like, well, we've got to protect the baby, and that's more important than the husband. And then the abuse began to escalate once the kid came into the sphere. Of course, it was always very under the radar psychological abuse that I didn't recognize,
Yeah.
So, and I've actually said in session, I think with Marissa, I did a session with Marissa, and I actually said that maybe if I got fat enough, he would leave.
Yeah. But actually, one time my husband accused me of gaining weight to push him away.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I was like, and years later, I'm like, huh, maybe he was right. Maybe that's what I was doing.
It's
I
super
don't know.
interesting when you recognize all of that psychological programming and you discover the root of it, right?
Yeah. Or even I was telling one of my girlfriends, I was like, I decided to rewatch Sleeping Beauty. And I was
Like
just
the
like,
Disney version.
the Disney, yeah. And I'm just the cartoon, like, oh, because I'd watched Alice in Wonderland again. And so I'm like, oh, let me watch this. And I was just like, no wonder all I wanted to do was get married because that's when your life begins.
Yeah.
And all I wanted was to get married. And, my ex and I got engaged after 3 weeks.
Wow.
So, we lived together after not even 3 months. Of course, we were already engaged, but and we got married less than a year after we met. And
That's
my mom was like, "Don't get married, just live together," and because she got divorced after 20 years from my dad, so it was like, okay, don't tell me what to do. I'm 21. I know what I'm doing. How dare you tell me what to do? I love him. And, he was very intelligent and, he spoke very well and we had fun together. He's funny. He's a funny guy. But, it was like the little tiny things just, and the meltdowns were, you know, just, I didn't, I didn't really notice them at first because he would hide them from me. But I remember walking in our bedroom one time and there was a punch in the wall. And I was like, so what happened here? And I was terrified to ask. I'm just like, because I'm not confrontational at all. Because my mom was not confrontational at all. She's very avoidant. So I've definitely got a lot of that from her. And he was like, oh, I was mad and I punched the wall. And I'm just like, I don't feel like that's normal. I did, my dad never did things like that. So it's like, huh, okay. And then I would start seeing them more and more, and hitting himself.
Go out back and chop wood with an axe or something, I mean,
Right? Oh, but they just,
for a
they're,
drive. These are
they're
ways.
like blind. They're so blind when they're in that place. I mean,
Yeah.
when we got where I was braver to talk about it, I was just like, I mean, do you realize that you said this to me or what? And he'd be like, no, I didn't. And I'm like, the F you did. I mean, like, you really hurt my feelings when you said that, you know? So it was, but it was tough because we both didn't really know how to work on things, but especially him, he wasn't,
Mhm.
he's avoidant too. And so it was like, I'm
Right.
finally getting brave to not be avoidant and to talk about our problems. And he didn't want to. And, the sex issue was huge for me. Going years without was not what I wanted in my marriage. And I actually asked him if we could open our marriage because I'm like, you don't want me, but someone else does. Lots of other people do. I could come on to all the time. And, he was like, no, he didn't want that. So I actually separated from him. And then that codependency kicked in. And I
And then
went
you went
back.
back, yeah.
Yeah, I went back. I moved out for all of a week before I went back. And, tail between my legs. Oh, I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. We can work on this. And
Mm.
that lasted 3 years. So, eh, is
And
what
here
it
you
is.
are.
Here I am,
Yeah.
so much better off.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting because, there's so much crossover in presentation of behavior between narcissism and Asperger's in
Yes,
particular.
yes,
And the main difference for anybody watching this is in some ways, the way the victim or partner is made to feel or treated is very much the same. But the difference is the person who is doing the abuse, their intention. So with a person who is on the autism spectrum, they don't actively seek to hurt somebody. They're not looking to hurt you. They just don't understand your perspective, your feelings. They can't empathize in that way. And they do have empathy, so it's not to say they don't, because that is one difference there is that a narcissist who is fully NPD, as in the personality disorder, which is a mental illness, that person does not have empathy. A person with autism does have empathy, they just have a hard time connecting and understanding the difference. But the way you are made to feel when you're on the receiving end of it is very much the same. And
yeah,
somebody who's a narcissist means to hurt you. Everything they say and do is calculated for a reaction.
yeah,
It,
yeah. And
what?
it's so interesting in some of the groups I'm in for support. It's like they're like, I don't know if he's narcissist or if he's ASD. And so there's this like conversation, and I'm like, you know what? At the bottom line is it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
What matters is how you're being treated, how you feel, and I don't care what the diagnosis is because it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, I
You
know. I
know?
say that to my clients a lot, like because they come to me and they are just craving this diagnosis. Like, well, first off, I am not a doctor. I
Sorry.
diagnose. Secondly, your partner is not my client. So I certainly can't even begin to conjecture without actually having an in-depth, discussion with this person. And then I can't disclose that to you either unless, I'm given permission.
Sure.
But the bigger issue is it doesn't matter what they are, what you call them, what they do, what any of it, none of it matters. What
Yeah.
matters is that somebody is treating you in a way that is hurtful, whether
Hmm.
intentional or not intentional. Your feelings matter. You have every right to be happy and to be treated with respect and love and care and to feel connectedness with your partner. If you do
Yeah.
not have or feel those things, then you are being abused in some way.
Hmm. Yeah. It's so interesting how many women I talk to that are stuck.
They feel like they have to have a diagnosis in order to separate
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah. And
right?
I'm like, you don't need that. Stop. Don't get yourself stuck in this thought loop of, I need to figure it out. You don't. What you need to do is just go, oh, I don't like being treated this way. I'm not happy. I'm
Mhm.
allowed to leave. I'm allowed to put myself first, and that self-trust, I think
Yeah,
that's something I do a lot of sessions on, is self-trust.
right. To
'Cause it's
fully
like,
value your feelings and to recognize that they matter and to put yourself first once in a while.
yeah, or
Not
all the time.
selfish. It's
I'm
not
like,
selfish.
I'm like, it's not selfish. Like, we've been programmed, and I'm like, as women, I feel like we've been
Yes.
trained to be martyrs, and like, oh, you have to sacrifice everything for your husband and your kids and whatever else. And it's like, no, that's BS. I don't have to
It is
sacrifice
BS.
anything.
I mean, how many women do you talk to who work full time? They come home from work, they're making dinner, packing school lunches for tomorrow, helping the kids with the homework, running a couple loads of laundry, run the vacuum cleaner, check
Yeah,
the mail, pay the bills, blah, 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 take their kid to karate lessons, then there's piano, then there's and all the stuff. Meanwhile, the husband comes home from work, sits his ass on the couch, watches TV or plays
yeah,
video games. That's
yeah,
video games,
yes,
and then says, "Hey, babe, what's for dinner?" And
yeah,
then she then, bathes the kid after dinner, reads him stories, gets him to bed, only
yeah,
to arrive on the couch for like, an hour of, oh, now she's exhausted and he
yeah,
expects sex.
yeah. It,
Uh,
it it's mind blowing. Well, or how many women have autoimmune disorders? I
yeah,
mean, in one of the groups I'm in, I mean, and I run like a small support group that's free and it's on Zoom, and
gotcha.
so probably half of the women have Hashimoto's. I mean, it's mind blowing, and as RTT therapists, we know, like, yes, this makes sense. We understand, like, yeah, that's what's happening.
During my first pregnancy, when I put on 70 or 80 pounds, because my thyroid crashed right then and there in that moment, it just happened like that. And of
Yeah.
course, what I realized now is I did that. My mind did that. I never had an issue, not really. My mind made me have the issue. And I know this to be
Yeah.
true because after the relationship ended, and I actually have done a lot of RTT work on my thyroid issue, it's gone now.
Yeah. Yeah, your mind was like, okay, I'll do her a favor. I'm going to help the baby by turning off her thyroid.
Yeah, we got to put on some weight, do it fast, protect that baby. And then maybe in the long term, we can get rid of the person who's emotionally abusive.
Yeah.
And, so my subconscious was aware, my subconscious was taking control. I never actually had thyroid disease, but yet I was on thyroid medication for 30 years.
Wow.
And
That's a long time.
yeah, it's gone now. And I've even managed to lose a ton of weight with RTT because of that.
Yeah.
Most people, well, when you have hypothyroidism, you gain weight, and when you have hyper, then you lose. But so I did put on weight because of that, of course, but all of it's gone now.
That's awesome.
Super interesting, isn't it? I know a lot of my clients they have Hashimoto's, they have hypothyroidism, IBS is pretty common,
Hmm.
MS. I hear a lot of people in trauma circles that have MS.
Yeah. Fibromyalgia.
Celiac,
Mhm.
fibromyalgia is huge in trauma.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, I think it's like we could take all of the autoimmune disorders and just be
Yeah.
like trauma.
Yeah. Well, and ADHD, not an autoimmune, of course, but
Yeah.
it has a lot of the same symptoms or presentation as trauma. And ultimately, there's an awful lot of crossover, and there's certainly some people have ADHD that are not traumatized in any way, but pretty much everybody who has ADHD has had trauma.
Yeah. And it's either they had ADHD first and it
It was
caused them
the chicken and the
trauma
egg,
because,
right? The chicken.
yeah, like, or they were traumatized and it changed their brain and they ended up with ADHD. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting combination there, I think.
I never made that connection for myself until my youngest child was diagnosed in middle school. And then I was like, I had a lot of these same behaviors and I struggle with some of the same things, maybe less so now as an adult, because you develop coping mechanisms as an adult, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I was able to fake being organized pretty well.
Well, yeah, you have to, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
but then I also see that when I was going through my divorce, and all of the abuse was coming to light and all of that, then the ADHD became a huge problem for me. So it was amplified tremendously by the abuse and by the trauma. Yeah. So which came first? I don't know.
Yeah, right. Well, and it's like what happened in my childhood that may have traumatized me to make me, to make my brain decide this was the way
Right.
to cope. Kind of like, I'm sure you've heard this. Like they're like, you could get rid of the DSM and like make it a leaflet and just label it. This is trauma. It's like all of this is just trauma. It's just how your brain decided to
Yeah.
cope. And
Well,
it's
nobody
like,
was born depressed. Nobody's born with an anxiety disorder. Nobody's born, I'm like, I mean, you can be born a psychopath, don't get me wrong,
yeah, yes, yes, but that's so rare. I mean, it's like I think most of the people that we would call psychopaths aren't true psychopaths. It's more like sociopath or other things that are just learned.
Narcissist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, my father-in-law being narcissist, like, got to the point where the last time they came to visit while we were still together, I got an Airbnb in my town, and I was like, I don't care what you tell him, I'm not going to see him for 1 second because he makes me very uncomfortable, and I don't want to stay in the same house with him. So I know he's your dad, and you want to have a relationship with him, and that's fine, but
I don't have to.
I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And I just took a week off. It was like,
Right.
bye. Let me know when they're gone, and I'll come back home. I mean, it was just like it was, and he was very uncomfortable with that. And I was like, I'm sorry, I can't. I don't want to see him.
Well, there's no reason to put yourself in a position to have this additional layer of abuse going on in your own home. Just
Yeah. Well, and he
be
looked at
nice.
me very sexually. Like it was just icky. It was
Yeah.
just very, very icky, and I was just like, no, I don't want to be in your presence. No thanks. Like,
Good for
good.
you.
And that was when, but things, as I stayed true to myself, after doing RTT work and coaching,
Mhm.
as I started being able to express my true feelings and like know what they even were, like that's when he definitely, I could tell he didn't really like me. Like he would say he loved me, but I'm like, you don't really like me. You don't like who I am. You don't like what I'm doing. Like it was, and like we were watching a show, and I can't remember what it was, but it was kind of a serious show, and it was about mental health. And so I take, that's what I do. Like I take it very seriously. And he was like making fun of it, and I was just like, please don't do that. Like
Making fun of the show.
like yeah, like I can't even remember what it was exactly, but it was just like
Oh,
he made fun of something on the show, and I was just like, I mean, this is a mental illness. Like
right.
this is trauma. Like please don't make fun of that.
Right.
Like this is an appropriate time to make fun of that.
For sure. I think, usually when people do those kinds of things, it's because they're very uncomfortable with it themselves, so they have to put it down. They're
Yeah.
insecure in their own self, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. The guy I dated after my husband was very much the deflecting with comedy type.
Mm-hmm.
So, he was always saying funny things because he was uncomfortable. So it was
Yeah.
interesting. I married my sister and then I dated my dad.
As we do, yes.
I was like, okay, yeah, but hey, I learned a lot quicker this time.
Rules of the mind 101, the mind seeks what is familiar, so you repeat those patterns from childhood and adult relationships. And
Yeah,
if you don't learn from it and grow from it, then you will repeat it over and over and over again.
yeah, yeah.
Right. So how does your typical client present, and how, where do they come from for you?
So I have that support group. So I have a Facebook group, and I'm doing a retreat as well, which really is, I mean, I think it's for Cassandra Syndrome, which is what is associated with being with someone on the
Is
spectrum as
that
far
what you
as
call being the partner of Asperger's, or
Yeah, I mean, it's associated with that because it's so common. Because what Cassandra syndrome is, like the lore behind naming it Cassandra syndrome is Greek mythology. And Cassandra had gone to, I believe it was Apollo, and she got the gift of sight. So she was psychic, knew everything, but she didn't sleep with him like she was supposed to. So he cursed her with no one believing her. So it's that dynamic of, I'm telling you something and I'm not believed, and no one believed. And I noticed that in myself, like if I was ever right about something, which was rare because he was so freaking smart, but if I was right, I would just go to the ends of the earth to prove I was right, to get him to say I was right. Because, I mean, even to the point where we took an art class together and I made a glass bowl. And he ended up giving it to a friend of his. And we were at the friend's house and I was like, oh, look, it's my bowl. And my husband's like, no, that was one I made. And I'm like, no, I know what I made. I worked hours on this, like, because it was glass art. And I'm like, no, I made that. And he's like, no, you didn't. That's the one I made. And I'm just like, oh, mother effer, don't you? I was so pissed. And the friend is like, it's okay. I believe you. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I am right. I need him. Like, I just had this need for him to tell me, yes, I realized I was wrong. You made it. Because I knew I was right. Like, I was like, you can't gaslight me this time. I know I'm right. And it was just infuriating to me. And I'm like
he
texting my
really
teacher.
believed, was it you really believed he made that, or was he just messing with you?
I think he really believed he made it.
Huh.
I think he had a lot of people that are on the spectrum have, cannot remember the name of it, but it's basically where they will shift reality in their minds and they believe it. Like,
Everybody does that to some degree.
yeah, but it's like it's a
Mhm.
more extreme thing where, and it's really, it was just so frustrating to me
Wow.
to have that. And so anyway, so Cassandra, that's what Cassandra syndrome is. But really what I think a lot of us are suffering from is ongoing traumatic relationship syndrome. So that's what I work with a lot, is more on those symptoms and things. And so a lot of it's about self-trust, working on people pleasing, because so many of us are people pleasers. And that's why we end up where we were, when I had to look at like what I was doing, like, yeah, I was totally a people pleaser. I said yes all the time when I wanted to say no. And like something I started adding in my transformations was, you say yes when you want to say yes, you say no when you want to say no, because it's like we need that permission, we need that program in our brain to tell us, like, yes, you can say no. I mean, I was working with one of the ladies in the support group and she was like talking about her life, like her Aspie had left her and she was just devastated, and then she finally realized, well, actually it was kind of a good thing. But she was like in some sort of community thing with like a committee, and they'd asked her to be on this other committee and she said yes even though she didn't want to. And I was like, girl, you're allowed to say no.
Yeah.
You can, and if it's uncomfortable, even say, let me get back to you, let me think about it, let me check my schedule. You can make these excuses. It's okay. And I think again, as women, we're really encouraged to be people pleasers as when we're young. And so it's like, well, of course, we've got this program telling us, oh, you need to be nice. You have to be the good girl. You have to, and it's such BS. So a lot of it is working on people pleasing, and even with some women who have left their Aspies and are, and have worked on healing some, a lot of it's about when they get in a new relationship and what's going on there. Because, I think your first relationship after something traumatic like that, and after you've even done some work, you really, I feel like what I've noticed is you really do a lot of healing work in a relationship. If you're in a healthy relationship,
Yes.
and in it, so like the boyfriend that I'm with now, the healthiest relationship I've ever been in, because I do get triggered. Things do happen. But I can go to him and say, hey, when this happened, this is how I was feeling. And there are things that are not his fault. It's just a situation happens.
Right.
And so it's like being able to go to him and say, hey, this is when this happened, this was coming up for me. these insecurities from when I was a child or whatever. And, being able to recognize that, and like, so I welcome the triggers even though they suck. But it's like I welcome it because it's showing me where you need healing, right? So it's like triggers are a blessing if you see them that way and notice, okay, this is why I'm triggered. What's happening? Okay, the 7-year-old me that's, having a little temper tantrum about something, or she's feeling insecure or whatever. Like, let me figure this out, because now I can see that it's coming up, and now I know what is coming up, and I can work with it.
It's almost always some kind of insecure feeling.
So yeah, I deal with a lot of insecurity.
And it often does not have anything direct to do with that relationship that you're in, unless
Yeah.
it's, an unhealthy one. But those triggers do still happen. I don't really see clients who are still in those relationships, because with narcissistic abuse, especially, there's so much brainwashing that goes on. We can work on self-love and feeling, finding their voice and speaking up and all of these things. But going right back home to the abuser, it undoes all the work.
Yeah.
So,
I've seen shifts happen where, because like for me, most of the women I see are in that stay go place.
Yeah.
So instilling the self-love and the self-trust. The self-trust is the biggest thing, I think. And so it's been like getting them to that point where they start trusting themselves. They do what I did, and they start actually
listen to that inner voice that's telling you this isn't right.
Yeah. And then they end up getting that strength to leave, it's like, it's that, or that strength to decide, sorry, I haven't will here.
It gives me the courage to make that separation. And I know with narcissistic abuse, the average is 7 times. 7 times it takes her to leave the abuser.
Yeah.
7 times to break away and go somewhere else, or kick him out, or however that goes. And then they go back. 7 times this repeats. Yeah. And I don't know if it's similar, but probably is. It's all tied into your own guilt, your own feeling that, well, it's not all bad, and maybe I'm making it up. Maybe it was me. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm, and it always goes back to her being that insecure.
Well, and trying to fix it, trying to be the one that is responsible for everything.
Well, who made you responsible for fixing other people? Nobody.
Exactly. Right? It's like, yeah, stop it.
Responsibility ends where your skin ends,
Mm-hmm.
You're responsible to fix this. And I am not responsible to fix you, but I fix me.
Well, and also I'm not responsible for how you feel. But I've noticed with a lot of the women I've worked with, it's not going to be the average of 7 times generally. Like most of them, if they actually decide to leave, then they typically stay gone. But it's more because the Aspie brain is like door shut, and they won't take them back.
Really?
If that makes sense. So it's an interesting dynamic, because a lot of times, and so in some cases, obviously, women do go back, and the Aspie will take them back. But and I use the term Aspie just because 2 of my best friends are on the spectrum, and that's what they prefer. It's interesting to see, though, that it's the decision to leave. It's the decision to allow themselves to feel guilty, stop worrying about how the other person's going to take it. A lot of these guys will threaten suicide and things like that. And, we're all like, look, if they do that, you call the suicide hotline, you call the police. You don't let them manipulate you that way. Because I know narcissists do that kind of thing too. And it's like, call their bluff.
Yeah.
Because if they are really going to do that, that's what you should do, is call the suicide hotline.
It's funny because when I was a kid, I grew up with a sister who was histrionic, narcissistic, borderline. Ooh. And she was constantly using that suicide threat to control, manipulate everybody in the family to get what she wanted.
Yeah.
And my mother would, I mean, she lived at home until she was 40, and paid no bills whatsoever. And my mom would just go like, I don't know what to do. I need her to leave. Like she just needs to go. And I'd say, well, mom, kick her out. And she's like, I can't. If something happened to her, I'd never forgive myself. And she was so afraid that she would. And I'm like, she's not going to. She hasn't so far. It's just control. She's manipulating you. And then
Hmm.
the last time my sister said that to me, I forget, we were arguing about something, and it was, she got so incensed that I called her on her crap.
Yeah.
She said, well, I'm just gonna go kill myself because you don't care, you don't love me, whatever. And I spun around and I was so mad in this heated moment, and I said to her, why don't you just go ahead then and get it over with? Because I'm sick of hearing about it. And then I stormed off, and I thought, oh, I don't believe I said that.
Yeah.
But you know what? In all the years since, she's never once said that to me ever again. Never.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because she realized you're not going to put up with her BS. So, you
Yeah.
know, and she doesn't want to be called on it.
Right. Of
And
course, I
that's,
don't talk to her at all anymore, but for years it was just,
yeah. Yeah. It's funny. My aunt is borderline. And so it's like, I understand
yeah.
how
I
that,
really, I really hate that term borderline personality disorder, because it really isn't. All it is deep, complex trauma.
yes.
And there's more and more evidence toward that. And I've actually worked now with a couple of straight borderline, and I mean by straight, it's not mixed with narcissism or anything else. That is actually a personality disorder. So
Right.
classical, straight up borderline, there's a lot of self-loathing, lack
Hmm.
of connectedness with other people, um, just strong disbelief in themselves, their value as a human being, all of this,
Yeah.
intense depression, huge panic attacks, all this stuff. And I mean, within a number of sessions, they're good.
That's amazing.
They're good. I had
Yeah.
one young woman that I worked with for a number of months, and she said, you did more for me in the few sessions we had than any psychiatrist, any bottle of pills, any psychologist, or any other type of therapist I've worked with, and I've worked with many, many, many in my life.
Yeah.
You did more in a few sessions than all of those people combined.
Yeah. Well, I wish people realized how important our subconscious is to
Yeah,
healing and
it's
how we
95%
have to get at those programs.
it's
Like
95%.
I love Bruce Lipton's explanation of like the hard drive and like our, our subconscious is the hard drive and like the subconscious programs are like computer programs. And I'm
Yeah,
like, we have to get at those programs because that's what's, you don't even notice it's there.
yeah. I don't know if you follow any of Paul McKenna's work. He's a British hypnotherapist, and he does this thing in some of his recordings where he walks you into this mainframe, which is your brain, and you visualize yourself walking into this room, and it's lined with machinery, with buttons and dials and flashing lights and beeps and tweeps, and and you're looking and you see all the labels on all of these dials, and you find the one that is your self-love button or whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah.
And you turn it all the way up, and you can see your hand reaching for it, and you visualize it, you turn it up, and then you feel all of that self-love and that feeling, whatever you're turning up, just fill you up, and you can feel it, the pressure, the tension, the floating sensation, all of it. And he
Yeah.
talks through that, and I think it's such a strong visual. I love to incorporate that into a lot of my transformation work with people, and people love it. They really do. It's huge.
Yeah.
You can
I,
visualize that. Like I'm feeling a lot of anger, and I can go into my mind and self hypnosis, and I can turn that dial down and just calm myself down.
That's so funny. I'm not super familiar with his work, but one of my girlfriends I did a session with, I've done a few with her, and she's a highly sensitive person. So
Mhm.
she really feels everything very strongly. So one of the sessions I was like, we're gonna install a dial and like a panel. And so I was like, it looks however you want it to look, and you've got all these labels of all your different emotions, and you can turn them down or up or whatever you need to do. And she was like, it was amazing. She
Yeah.
was like, it was so great. I was like, all you have to do is just see that dial and you can just adjust the dial however you need. So if you know you're going into a challenge, you can turn some things down and turn other things up. And I was like, I mean, you can't always leave them that way, depending on what you're doing, because you need to feel your feelings. But
You don't want to be happy and laughing at a funeral.
exactly, right? Exactly. So
Happiness. Oops, I went to a funeral.
it was great. I was like, this is the best thing ever. Like, I love and stuff. I was like, what did it look like? You know, after the session, I'm like, tell me what you did. I want to see how you, because that's always interesting to me. Like when I do left hand, right hand, and I always say it's on Polaroids, you know, and then I'm like, and you destroy them, and I'm always like interested in what they did to destroy them. Because one of my clients said, I threw him on the ground and I poured lighter fluid on him and I set him on fire and then I stomped him. I was like,
Wow.
okay, yes, I like it. Perfect.
I like to do a visualization when we're letting go of something,
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, wherever it resides, maybe you feel it in the pit of your stomach or whatever, and then you feel it rising through your body, and you feel it, and it's rising and rising, and now it's a lump in your throat. You can hardly swallow. And I notice sometimes they'll start to cough, and then we visualize it. You know, maybe it's come down your arm, and you can feel it as your muscle tenses, and then it comes down past your elbow, and then you feel this tingling as it comes into your forearm, and then all of a sudden it pops out into your hand, and it's just a little ball, and it's, you know, and you look at it with your mind, and then you shrink it, and then it's getting smaller and smaller, and then I let them figure out how they're letting it go. Are you crushing it in your fist? Are you throwing it? Are you lighting it on fire with your brain? I mean, you know, whatever visual comes to mind to get rid of that thing. And then I let them sit there as long as they want to. And you can let me know when it's gone. And how does that feel? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's hugely powerful to install these kinds of visual aids into the subconscious thinking about how you're in control of letting go of things.
Yes.
Once you let
I've done a lot of sessions on letting go. I don't know.
you're choosing to let go. You're choosing to not feel this way anymore. You're choosing to not feel sorry for yourself. You're choosing to, you know, whatever the thing is.
Yeah. And I think RFPI is like,
it's a brilliant.
Honestly, I feel like I could almost do just RFPI for most issues sometimes because it's so powerful.
Right. It is powerful. So for anybody that's not familiar with RTT, RFPI is a tool we use in our therapy, and it's role, function, purpose, intention. So the idea that any problem, maybe you're an alcoholic, well, what does that benefit to you? Every problem you have that you're struggling to get rid of, it has some purpose, some intention, some benefit to you. So maybe if you're an alcoholic, nobody asks you to drive carpool. Maybe if you're an alcoholic, nobody expects anything from you because you're unreliable. So you don't have to do things for other people. Maybe nobody expects you to hold a job and you can just sit home and watch TV all day. I mean, whatever the thing is, there is a purpose, a benefit. Your mind came up with this thing, right? So when we can get at that through that tool, it's brilliant, brilliant work.
Oh, it's always interesting what comes up. I had one woman, actually, it was an alcoholic, and she, every single part that we talked to, because I think I talked to 3 parts, was to punish her.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wow, I've never had anybody have every part want to punish them. Usually it's protect. And I was just like, wow. And I don't know what she did in her past that she felt like she needed to be punished for, but so we did some forgiveness work because, you know, like forgive yourself. You know, you don't deserve to be punished for the rest of your life for whatever it was that you did. It was really, really interesting because I had never had it come up.
The first time I ever had punishment come up when I did a session on myself was sitting in a chair with Marissa. And I actually fought with her about it. She said, so you're punishing yourself. And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, well, and she's referring back to her notes. I wrote it down. You said da 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 da. She said, didn't you just say that I do this because? And I was like, yeah, you know. And she said, so you said you were punishing yourself. I wrote it down. And I thought, okay, I'd never thought of it that way before, you know. And I really, even after the session, I thought, no, that's not right. I don't do that. And it wasn't until my final weight loss session I did last fall that I realized, everything about what I was doing was self-sabotage. So it was,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I started probably 3 or 4 months ago. I started talking every single client. I talked to the self-sabotage part
yeah.
because it's like we all have that part and we all are doing that somehow. So like I might as well just talk to it in every session and just
It's
see.
super fun to realize, well, it's not fun, but it's interesting anyway. Um, when you recognize all of these parts, and the parts work is so interesting, isn't it? Because
Yes.
different parts of you have different intentions. And it
Yeah,
all
and then some
sounds,
of are fighting with each other,
yeah, it
it's
sounds
like,
kind of like hairy fairy goofy stuff, right? But
hmm,
it's super true. A part of me really likes to do this, and a part of me really hates to do this, and they fight, and it causes you to get stuck, right?
yes. And it's fast. I find every session fascinating. It's just so fun. I'm just like, I know you're crying, but this is great. It's good you're feeling your feelings. Because that's what I've run into a
Love
lot. I
that.
don't know if you run into this, but a lot of my clients don't feel their feelings.
Mhm.
And that's
They just
a
stuff
coping
them down.
mechanism. It's like, and that's how I was. I didn't feel my feelings I wasn't allowed to feel my feelings as a child.
They
You
just
know,
stuff them down.
yeah, it's like, oh, don't be angry, don't be sad,
Well, don't
and
cry. Like, why not?
yeah, don't cry. And I had to be the good daughter because my sister was difficult, and so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna numb myself, I guess, and
Right.
it worked great for my marriage to be
Can't
numb,
cause any problems for other people. No,
right? I
definitely
can just
not.
be, I'm just the good little sweet daughter. I'm just the good girl, and I don't cause any trouble. So it was so interesting to realize, oh, okay, this is what I've been doing. I've been feeling my feelings. So I get triggered now because I am feeling my feelings. And so it's like, I'm like, okay, great. I'm
Right.
great.
Big
This is
struggle.
awesome.
Once a person has kind of kept their feelings hidden for so long, once they start actively feeling and expressing and releasing their emotions, then they begin to feel a little uncomfortable, like somehow it's not appropriate, and they worry that there's something wrong and I'm a mess. And I mean, like, no, sweetie, you're just letting your feelings out, the things that you should have been letting out. And
Yeah.
the depth of these things, you've been cramming them down for so long, it's going to take a while to get all this out.
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny. What just came to mind was when I was 19, I got a tattoo on my hip, and it was an eye with three teardrops and a little rose wrapped around it, and it represented my eternal sadness. And I have chronic hip pain in that hip. And I was like, so this, me putting that tattoo there, and to me, it represented my pain and sadness,
Did you get
and
it
it was
taken
all
off or
there.
have it altered?
I'm going to have it altered. I haven't. I like this is something I figured out recently, and it's funny because I've been working on this hip pain forever, and then I finally went, my tattoo. That's what it meant. Like it. I was putting my sadness there, so it was like the sadness I wasn't feeling that
Like
I
a badge
wanted
of
other people
honor
to
to be
see.
eternally sad?
Like
What
yeah,
was
it
you
was.
thinking? Like, why, as a 19-year-old, what would make
Yeah,
you want to be
I,
internally
I
sad?
think she didn't know how to talk to people about her feelings and what she was feeling, so she was just like, okay, if I get this tattoo, people will ask me about it, and then maybe they'll dig and they'll pull it
Well, you
out of
can
me.
pull your pants down in public.
Yeah, right. I know, right? Well, I was hot then. I was like, "Hey, look at my tattoo on my skinny hip."
Hey,
It has altered itself at this point. I sent a picture to one of my girlfriends. I was like, "My tattoo. I just figured out my hip pain," and she's like, "That is horrifying." And I'm like, because it's just it's stretched and it's almost 30 years old, so it's not like it's
yeah.
new. But yeah, it was interesting to finally realize that, oh my gosh, that's what I did. That's what 19-year-old me did. She wanted someone to ask her something and
Why
pull
are you
out of
doing
her
that,
what was,
Michelle? Why?
yeah, it was just, I'm like, oh, and I didn't know how to ask for help. So I just was like, that was my way. It was like, okay, I'm just gonna
Wow, that
feel
is
this,
that is like amazing.
right? And I was just like, oh my God, what was I doing?
That's funny. It makes
Okay.
everything. And I've been toying with getting a tattoo recently. Now I'm
Hmm.
gonna have to think long and hard about that.
Do like, well, and just what it means to you, right? Like, what's the meaning? Because that was, I mean, anybody who asked me, I would tell them that's my internal sadness, and I think I wanted them to dig when I would tell them, and like I actually had a picture of it that I would carry with me. So that I could show people without taking my pants down. Like, here's my tattoo. And
Oh my gosh.
and no one did what I wanted them to do, and just, berate me into telling them how I felt and getting that sadness out or whatever. I don't know.
And if somebody had said to you, "What are you so sad about?" I mean, what would you have said?
I don't know. I probably would have said I don't know.
Would have
Or I
probably
would have
scared
said
you
I'm
to
not
death.
sad. Do what?
It would scared you to death, I would bet.
Oh, yeah. Or I would have just puddled into a
Laughed or
little
something.
crying ball. Like, it was really interesting to me. I was like, oh my gosh. So it
Huh.
was it was a very interesting realization of like what I did to put pain in my hip and
Oh, huh.
how it gravitated there over the because like I started with low back pain and then I thought it would leave as soon as I left my husband. That's what I was counting on. I was like, surely as soon as I leave, it's gone. And then
Everything that's wrong with me is his fault, of course.
yes, it's all his fault. And
All his fault.
no.
Like, no, there's some more work I need to do there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And the intuitive coaching program I did was really intense for that. So it was, definitely digging into the mom wound and the dad wound and this, all of those fun things.
Yeah, I know. I did trauma coaching certification, and whew, that was us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an RTT therapist I was talking to. We're friends, and she did Gabor Mate's compassion inquiry program. And she was like, oh my gosh. She was like, you can't have anything else on your plate when you're doing that. She was like,
Hard work.
it's a lot of work. And she's, got kids and obviously in a practice. And she was just like, I did not know what I was getting myself into. Because I told her, I was like, I thought about doing it. And she was like, just be
Mm.
mindful that you're going to be a mess for a year. And I was like, okay, good to know.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
The
she took
work.
it as a certification or as a
Hmm.
participant? Yeah.
Yeah. And you do the course material 3 times.
Oof.
So it's, I think it was 8 modules, and you have these like live classes and groups, and she was just like, it's intense.
Wow.
And I was
That's
like,
fascinating.
yeah, I was like, okay, good to know. Before I
I struggled to live through trauma coach training because, a lot of it is you are your own case study. And
hmm
we did a lot of writing, a lot of essays, a lot of pretty in-depth assignments, reflecting on our experiences. And, so here you are, and I was still very fresh in the trauma. Not even, I finished it shortly after my divorce was finalized. And yeah, just like looking at all of my crap with a microphone or with a magnifying glass and
yeah.
examining and writing and reflecting all of that stuff while you're still living it. It was, whew.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's like we're so intense. Did you find you had trouble even knowing how you felt?
in the beginning, yes. I mean, it's
Yeah.
funny because when my ex-husband and I, we were still married at the time, we started going to couples counseling, which, by the way, is a really bad idea with a narcissist. Um, of course, usually when you start couples counseling, you don't necessarily know this person is a narcissist. You just know there's something really wrong, right?
Yeah.
So one of the first exercises she had us do was to do some attachment quizzes, figure out your attachment style, and mine came back secure, and his was anxious avoidant. And I
Hmm.
just thought, huh, yeah, I'm so secure and all of this stuff. And of course, it wasn't until I went partway through that trauma training, I actually was thinking a lot about that. And I thought, why do I have such an intense fear of abandonment? And I always have if I have secure attachment.
Yeah.
And you know what, that comes down to parts work, of course. Parts of me were secure, parts of me were not.
Right.
So I did that again while I was going through trauma class, and of course got a completely different answer because I understood myself so much differently. And I
Mm-hmm.
also knew the whole score of what had happened in my marriage at this point. So, you know, to have like moved down the road and really understand yourself through healing is a massive task, but it also enables you to really fully understand your path, how you got there, and how you're going to move forward and get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the first things I have my clients that do the Cassandra package is like, I want to know your attachment style. I want you to take this quiz. Let's look at all these different things so that we can see where you're at and move forward from that. And then, I'll give them like journal prompts. Like, okay, I want this. This is your homework. Let's do these little things, and then the RTT session, because that's one of the first things we'll do too, is the first RTT session. And I'm like, okay, anything that comes up in the session, I can, okay, we'll make sure that how they're working with that as we're moving forward in coaching, because we know it's there in the subconscious. So let's see, yeah, that's really interesting to
Well, it's been really fascinating talking with you today,
thank
and
you.
I appreciate your time so much. And
Thank you.
thanks everybody for tuning in to listen to myself and Michelle Carbone talking today about RTT and coaching. And we wish you to have a wonderful day.